They thought they could take my land and get away with it. But when the HOA blocked off my ranch with a fence, they didn't expect me to fight back or to turn the tables in a way that would leave the entire neighborhood stunned. I never thought I'd wake up one morning and find strangers driving steel posts into my land. It was a Wednesday, just past sunrise, when the sound of machinery yanked me out of bed. I live on a modest ranch just outside of town, the kind of place with more animals than people and more sky than buildings. For 15 years, this land had been my peace, my escape, and my livelihood. But that morning, something was off. The birds were still chirping, the horses restless in the stable. But over it all was a distinct clank of metal and the low rumble of diesel engines. I stepped outside in my boots and flannel shirt, thinking maybe the county was working on the power lines again. What I saw instead made my stomach twist. A crew of workers wearing orange vests and hard hats were digging holes and setting fence posts right across the dirt road that split through my property. It was the only direct path from the new residential community next door to the highway. That road had been carved into the land by my grandfather, used by locals for generations, and now someone was fencing it off like it belonged to them. I marched straight over to the site supervisor, trying to stay calm. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked. He barely looked up. "Just doing our job, sir. HOA project. We've got permits." "HOA?" I blinked. "This is private property." He shrugged like it wasn't his problem. "You'll have to talk to your HOA board." I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. "I'm not even in the HOA. This is my land. My name's on the deed. You people are trespassing." He finally gave me a real look, a bit uneasy now. "You'll have to take it up with them. We're just following orders." I stormed back to my house, heart pounding. I pulled out my file drawer and found the property map and land title. Just as I thought, the road they were blocking ran straight through my property line. The HOA neighborhood didn't begin until 600 feet past the fence they were putting up. I snapped pictures, took video of the construction, then tried calling the HOA office. No answer. I emailed, left voicemails, and even posted in their ridiculous Facebook group. Nothing. Radio silence. By evening, the fence was halfway done. Thick metal posts set in concrete, tall chain links stretching across the path I used every single day. I couldn't believe it. I'd heard horror stories about power-hungry HOAs, but I never thought they'd come for me like this, not without warning, not without a single knock on the door. The next day I drove to the HOA office, a sleek building with glass doors and fake plants. The receptionist looked at me like I didn't belong, which I suppose I didn't, technically. After 20 minutes of waiting, a man named Craig finally came out to talk. He wore a tight polo shirt, khakis, and that fake smile you see on real estate agents. "Mr. Reeves, right," he said, like we were old friends. "You put a damn fence on my land, Craig," I said flatly. "Explain." He gestured to sit down, like this was a civilized debate. "First, let me say, I understand your frustration. Cut the crap. Why didn't anyone contact me?" He hesitated, then leaned in like he was sharing a secret. "Technically, we believed that section of the road fell under community jurisdiction. Our planner was working off an old county layout that suggested a shared easement." "That's not true," I said. "I have the deed, and the easement ends before the fence begins." He nodded slowly. "Look, I'm sure we can figure something out, but at this point, the construction is already funded and in progress. Undoing it would create complications." "Complications?" I scoffed. "Try lawsuits." That got his attention. The smile wavered for a moment, then came back even tighter. "We'd prefer not to escalate. Perhaps we can offer you some sort of compensation." It wasn't about the money, it was the principle. You don't just walk onto someone's land and build a fence like it's yours, especially when that land means something. That road wasn't just a shortcut, it was how I moved my hay trucks, how I got to the vet when one of my cows was sick, how I got home. They didn't just put up a fence, they drew a line across my life. I left that office, feeling sick. The worst part, I realized they weren't going to take the fence down. They had money, lawyers, and enough red tape to make me choke. I'd have to fight this the hard way. So I started gathering evidence. I got drone footage, timestamps, GPS, overlays from county maps. I talked to my lawyer, who said I had a solid case, but it might take months to get a court order, longer if they dragged it out. And in the meantime, that fence wasn't going anywhere. Then, 3 days later, I had a revelation. I was standing by the fence, watching a minivan try to turn around after realizing the road was blocked. When it hit me, all those people were used to cutting through my land. They'd been doing it ever since the HOA neighborhood was built last. Yeah, it was convenient. I had let it slide because I didn't mind. But now that same HOA was treating my land like a public alley. Well, fine. If they wanted to treat it like a road, I'd make it one. That night I stayed up sketching out a plan. I remembered that old toll road I used to drive through on road trips, just a booth, a sign, and a guy collecting change. I didn't need a full operation, just something to make a statement. I looked up the regulations. Turns out, in our county, a landowner can declare a private access road and charge a toll, as long as the proper paperwork is filed. I could set the fee. I could set the rules. The next morning, I bought plywood, metal sheets, paint, and some orange cones. By the weekend, I had built a makeshift toll booth with a large sign that read, "Private road ahead, $5 toll per vehicle, cash only." I parked my old pickup near the gate, put on a wide-brimmed hat, and sat in a lawn chair with a coffee thermos and a cash box. The first few cars didn't know what to do. Some tried to argue. One guy laughed and sped off, but by the end of the day, I'd collected $65, not bad for a dirt road, and just like that, the game changed. Word spread fast. The HOA was livid. They sent me a cease and desist email, which I politely ignored. After all, I wasn't breaking any laws. I was using my land, the same land they tried to steal a piece of each day. More and more cars showed up, and most paid without complaint. It was cheaper than the gas they'd burn taking the long way. I hired 2 teenagers from the nearby town to take shifts at the booth. I installed a camera. I even got a local print shop to make proper signs. I wasn't just making a point anymore, I was running a business. The fence still there, but now it served a different purpose. It marked the boundary between arrogance and consequence, between theft and ownership, between their rules and mine. Running a toll booth on my own land wasn't something I'd ever imagined. But life has a funny way of handing you unexpected turns, or in this case, blocked roads. Within a week of putting up the $5 toll sign, my life had shifted from peaceful ranching to collecting cash from suburban commuters. It was petty, it was brilliant, and it worked. By Monday morning I had regulars. I recognized their faces, their cars, and even their morning habits. The guy in the black sedan always handed me a crisp 10 and told me to keep the change. The mom in the SUV with a cracked windshield dropped exact change without making eye contact. One old-timer in a dusty Ford pickup grinned every time he paid, muttering something like, "Damn fine idea, son." And there was one teen with loud music and an e-cigarette who paid in quarters just to be annoying. But money was money. Of course. The HOA wasn't thrilled. By the second week they started sending threats, letters in fancy envelopes with bold words like unlawful, unauthorized structure, and nuisance to the community. I showed every letter to my lawyer, a sharp woman named Clarissa with a sense of humor as dry as mine. "They're bluffing," she said after reading the second cease. "You've got clear ownership of the land. The road is private, and you filed the toll declaration with the county. You're operating within your rights." Let them scream, and scream they did. At first it was emails and letters. Then came the HOA Facebook posts. People accused me of being greedy, of holding the neighborhood hostage. They called me a bully, a scammer, even a terrorist. Someone photoshopped a picture of me in a bandit mask. I laughed. I printed it out and taped it inside the toll booth. But for every critic there were supporters too, quiet ones. A few folks slipped me thank you notes. One dad handed me a coffee and said, "You're doing God's work." A young woman offered to make me a proper toll sign with professional vinyl lettering, and one sweet elderly lady baked me a pie peach cobbler. Still warm because, as she put it, the HOA has been walking over folks too long. Still, not everyone took the toll so kindly. One morning, a man in a red Jeep drove up, saw the sign, rolled down his window and sneered, "This is extortion." "No," I said calmly, "this is private property. I pay HOA fees. That road belongs to the community." "Wrong. That road crosses my land. Your fees don't cover my dirt." He stepped out of his Jeep like he wanted to fight. I stood my ground. "Try to drive through without paying, and I'll call the sheriff. Try to touch that fence, and I'll charge you for damages." He got back in the Jeep, peeled out in reverse, and took the long way. I saw him 2 days later. This time, he paid the toll without a word. Around that time, I realized I had something much bigger than a toll road. I had power, not because of the money, though the cash was definitely piling up, but because I controlled something they'd taken for granted: access. For months, maybe years, they'd used my land like it was their God-given right. And now, for the first time, they had to think twice. The HOA board finally caved and asked to meet. I agreed, on my turf literally. They came out to the ranch one sunny afternoon, stepping gingerly around cow dung and watching their shoes like city people do. There were 4 of them, Craig of course, 2 board members I didn't recognize, and a younger woman with a clipboard and nervous smile. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Craig started, still pretending we were cordial. "I didn't agree to anything yet," I said. "Let's hear it." "We believe this toll road situation is escalating unnecessarily," he said in his best business voice. "There's been community disruption, traffic issues, and complaints from emergency services about delayed response times. Maybe they should have thought of that before fencing off my land," I replied. "We acknowledge the fence may have been installed hastily," he admitted, his jaw tightening, "and we're willing to offer compensation if you remove the toll booth and allow open access again." "What kind of compensation?" "We can discuss a lump sum payment," said the woman with the clipboard, "or monthly access fees from the HOA. How much are you offering?" Craig smiled, as if sealing a deal. $5,000. I actually laughed out loud. "You must be kidding. I make that in 2 weeks now." He frowned. This isn't sustainable. You're disrupting the lives of hundreds of residents. They are. Disrupted mine first, I said. This is me leveling the field. The meeting ended with no agreement. They left looking flustered and defeated. I leaned against the gate, arms folded, watching them trudge back to their fancy SUVs. This wasn't just a squabble over property anymore. This was a battle of principle, and they were losing. A week later, things escalated. One night I heard tires screeching outside near the toll booth. I rushed out with my flashlight and saw my booth had been smashed. Wood splintered, the sign was gone. The cash box, it looked like someone rammed into it deliberately. There were tire tracks leading off into the dark. I called the sheriff immediately. He showed up within half an hour, took a statement, and shook his head. You got enemies now, he said. This ain't just about fences anymore. I rebuilt the booth, but this time with metal siding and a steel post anchored deep into the ground. I installed a motion-activated camera and floodlight, and I posted a new sign. All activity recorded, property monitored. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The vandalism didn't scare me. If anything, it confirmed I was making an impact. I posted the damage photos online, and the support came pouring in. One post about the destruction went viral, shared thousands of times. Suddenly, local news called me for interviews. Rancher turns fence dispute into private toll road was the headline on Channel 9. A reporter came out, filmed me at the gate, and even interviewed some of the drivers. The story exploded. People from nearby towns drove out just to see the toll roads and paid just for the novelty. One guy drove through 3 times, filming a vlog for YouTube. I had a journalist from Austin offer to do a documentary on HOA overreach and rural resistance. For a moment, I wasn't just a rancher defending his land. I was a symbol of pushback, and I liked that. The HOA, on the other hand, hated it. Their public relations team scrambled. They issued statements about working to resolve community concerns and ensuring respectful dialogue, but it was too late. Their reputation had cracked, and the community was starting to question them. Some residents came by just to chat. A middle-aged couple told me they'd always hated how the HOA did things behind closed doors. A young man said he got fined for a mailbox being too artistic. A teacher explained how she'd been warned for hanging laundry outside. They were tired, and I had become the outlet for their frustration. Eventually, the HOA made a new offer, this time much more serious. They proposed removing the fence entirely and signing a written agreement acknowledging my land rights. In exchange, I'd agreed to discontinue toll collection, but I'd retain control over the road and could reopen tolling if any future violations occurred. I didn't say yes, not yet, because for the first time in years I felt like I had control over something that mattered, not just the road, but the right to stand up for myself. I walked that road at sunset, boots kicking up dust, eyes on the fence line. It used to just be part of my daily routine, something I barely noticed. Now it meant something. It stood for what happens when people get too comfortable taking what isn't theirs. It stood for the fight, not just mine, but anyone's, to protect what's rightfully theirs. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I could see the lights of the HOA neighborhood flickering to life. Behind those fences and manicured lawns were people starting to understand something simple. You don't mess with a man's land and expect to walk away without paying the toll. By the time the 3rd month rolled around, I had turned from an ordinary rancher into something of a legend around town. Most folks didn't even know my name. They just called me the toll road guy. The story had legs of its own now. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, questions from other landowners, even curious onlookers asking if they could tour the toll booth. I didn't care much for attention, but I wasn't naive either. I knew what this story represented to people. Someone finally standing up to the little tyrannies that make life unbearable. But that wasn't why I was doing it. Not really. I wasn't trying to be famous or make a statement for anyone else. I just wanted my land respected. That's all I ever wanted. The mornings on the ranch were still the same. The rooster crowed, the horses nickered when I walked into the stable, and the scent of hay and earth reminded me why I chose this life in the first place. But every time I glanced toward the toll road, toward that damned fence, I felt something heavier pressing down on me. Not guilt, not regret, just weight. Like I was carrying something bigger than I asked for. The new toll booth was solid now, reinforced steel, painted white, with a roof to shield from the sun. I even had a solar panel powering the camera and a small electric fan inside. I took shifts with 2 part-timers, Jace, a 19-year-old kid saving up for trade school, and Nancy, a retired widow who said the work gave her something to look forward to. They called it the gate, and they ran it like pros. By the end of each week we had a thick wad of cash and a logbook full of vehicle plates and timestamps. It wasn't a gold mine, but it kept the ranch afloat, and then some still. The HOA wasn't finished. I got a letter hand-delivered this time. No more emails, no more friendly fake smiles. This one had legal teeth. It was a formal complaint filed with the county, citing public endangerment, obstruction of emergency services, and operating an unlicensed commercial enterprise. I took it straight to Clarissa. She looked it over and sighed. They're throwing everything they can find to see what sticks. It's weak, but if the county takes it seriously, They might try to get an injunction. Injunction for what? For using my own land. They'll argue you're creating a hazard, blocking access. Spin it into something emotional. Ambulances delayed. Fire trucks slowed down, that sort of thing. I leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, so now they care about emergencies. That fence has slowed me down plenty, but no one asked about that. She nodded. We can fight it. Just be prepared. It's not about right or wrong anymore. It's about who has the time and money to drag this through court. That hit me hard. I'd been running on principle for weeks, feeding on stubbornness like it was fuel, but now I had to face the real possibility of a drawn-out legal battle. Not over a fence, not over a toll, but over whether a man had the right to protect his property from being swallowed by convenience. I walked the length of the fence that afternoon, boots kicking up dust along the edge where the ranch met the HOA as paved sidewalk. It was strange how clean the divide looked from a distance, a perfect straight line between two worlds. On one side, my open fields, quiet, sun-drenched, alive. On the other, houses packed like boxes, every lawn cut the same, every tree trimmed to regulation height. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold, a new path, narrow but well-worn, snaking through the brush behind one of the HOA homes and coming out just past the edge of the toll road, a shortcut. Someone was bypassing the booth. I followed the trail, crouched low near the fence, and spotted tire tracks, bicycle and maybe even scooter. Kids, probably. Maybe adults. The brush had been pressed down recently, and there were pieces of plastic flag markers stuck in the soil. Someone had even tied an old ribbon to a branch like a marker dot. So now they were sneaking around the toll road. I wasn't angry. I was insulted that night. I drove stakes into the ground and strung a new section of fencing right through the brush, reinforcing it with thorny cuttings from the mesquite trees. Not enough to hurt anyone badly, just enough to send a clear message. This road is not your playground. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why go to such lengths to avoid $5? This wasn't about the toll. It was about pride, about defiance. Same as mine. Later that week, a knock on my door surprised me. It was just after dark and I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and found a boy, maybe 10, maybe 11, standing there with a bicycle helmet tucked under his arm. "Mr. Reeves," he said, voice small. "Yeah, I'm sorry we went through the woods. We didn't mean to mess up your land." I blinked. "You're one of the kids sneaking around the toll road." He nodded quickly. "My dad told us not to pay the toll. He said it was stupid and that you were just being stubborn." I crouched down a bit. "And what do you think?" He looked around, embarrassed. "I think it's kinda cool." I smiled. "Thanks for coming by and telling me the truth." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a $5 bill, crumpled and sweaty. "We rode through like 3 times. I wanted to pay what we owed. I didn't take the money." I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Tell you what, you keep that, just don't go through the woods anymore. It's not safe. If you want to ride through, come up to the booth and say hi. No charge for bikes, okay?" He grinned and nodded before pedaling off into the night. It shook me more than I cared to admit. I'd drawn a line in the sand, but maybe it was time to soften some of the edges. I wasn't against the people in those homes. I was against being stepped on. Maybe they needed reminding that this was never about punishing them. It was about being heard. That weekend, I put up a new sign: toll, road vehicles, $5, bikes and pedestrians, free. Respect the land, respect the rules. I posted it online too. Reactions were mixed. Some applauded the change. Others accused me of giving in. One guy called it a publicity stunt. I didn't care. I knew why I did it. And maybe, just maybe, a few more folks would start seeing me not as the enemy, but as a neighbor drawing a hard boundary. A few days later, a fire truck came through. Not fast, just a test, probably, but they paid the toll. Not out of obligation, I think, but out of respect. The driver saluted me as they passed that evening. A letter came in the mail. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was from the county. A hearing had been scheduled. The HOA had formally filed for a ruling to determine whether my toll road constituted a public hazard and whether the county would step in to enforce a cease operation. It was official now. The lines had been drawn. Not just through dirt and dust, but through courtrooms and county halls. I wasn't backing down. They could call me stubborn, call me crazy, call me anything they wanted. But I knew one thing for certain. You don't build a fence on a man's land without asking, and you sure as hell don't expect him to forget. The county courthouse was a squat, gray building with a dusty parking lot and flickering fluorescent lights inside. I'd only ever been there to renew my land deed or file routine paperwork. I never thought I'd be walking through its double doors as the central figure in a case that had captured the attention of half the state. But there I was, boots polished, hat in hand, lawyer by my side, and a folder thick with maps, receipts and photographs tucked under my arm. The hearing was open to the public, and word must have spread fast, because by the time we arrived, the room was packed. Reporters stood in the back, notebooks ready, cameras dangling from their necks. Some folks from town had shown up just to see the rancher take on the suits. As one guy muttered proudly to his wife in the row behind me, I recognized a few Faces from the toll booth line, drivers who had paid their $5, smiled and moved along. And in the front row, arms crossed and lips tight, sat Craig from the HOA, flanked by two attorneys in sharp suits and blank expressions. The judge was a tired-looking woman in her 60s, her robe wrinkled and her tone firm. "We're not here to settle petty grudges," she said straight away. "We're here to determine if Mr. Reeves' toll road constitutes a public nuisance or safety concern, and whether the HOA's actions fall within legal bounds." Clarissa stood and opened up, sighed calmly. She presented the land deeds, the county maps, and the paperwork we'd filed for the toll operation. Then she laid out the timeline, the unannounced fence, the interruption of access, the legal right of a private landowner to manage passage on their own property. The HOA's lawyers tried to paint a different picture. They argued the toll road had caused distress in the community, that emergency vehicles had been delayed, though they had no real data. They claimed children had been traumatized by the toll booth, which made even the judge raise an eyebrow. Then they pulled out their strongest argument, that I had turned private land into a public highway without proper regulation. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "I never wanted to run a toll road," I said plainly. "All I wanted was for the HOA to respect my land. They built a fence without permission, blocked off the road my family has used for generations. When I tried to talk, they ignored me, so I made them listen." There was a murmur in the crowd. Someone in the back actually clapped before being shushed. "I didn't build this to make money," I continued. "But since they cut off my access, I decided to charge for theirs. I followed the law. I filed the paperwork. And every dollar collected has gone back into maintaining the road, the fencing, and the land. I'm not obstructing anything. I'm defending what's mine." When I sat down, I saw something surprising. The judge didn't look annoyed. She looked ... thoughtful. The hearing lasted 3 hours. The lawyers argued, Clarissa rebutted. The judge asked pointed questions, and I answered honestly. At the end, the judge said she would issue a ruling in 2 weeks. 2 weeks of waiting, 2 weeks of silence from the HOA, who now operated more carefully, clearly warned by their lawyers not to provoke me further. 2 weeks of speculation from the media, and 2 long weeks of running the toll road with a growing awareness that everything might soon change for better or worse. But those 2 weeks did more than test my patience. They brought something unexpected. Unity. It started small. A group of residents from the HOA neighborhood came out to the ranch one morning with a tray of cinnamon rolls and a handwritten note that said, "We support your stand." I invited them in for coffee. We talked. They told me stories not about the road, but about life inside the HOA. One man had been fined for planting a tomato patch in his backyard, violated aesthetics, they said. A woman got written up because her front door was painted an unapproved shade of blue. A retired couple had their bird feeder removed because it attracted non-native species. The more they talked, the more it hit me. This toll road hadn't just stirred resentment, it had exposed it. Before long, more people started showing up. Some brought baked goods, others brought support. One family handed me a folder full of HOA emails they had saved over the years, full of questionable decisions and shady budgeting. Someone made a social media page called The Toll Truth, documenting the whole story. It blew up. What began as a property dispute had become a movement, one that asked a very simple question: who really gets to decide how we live? And then came the protest, not on my land but inside the HOA neighborhood itself. About 30 residents marched down their own sidewalks carrying homemade signs. HOA does not equal homeowner. Fences off our rights. We stand with the ranch. The HOA board tried to stop them, issued warnings, sent security, but they couldn't find everyone. And for the first time, people felt like their voices actually mattered. Meanwhile, I kept the toll booth running, even lowered the fee for a few days as a thank you to those who had backed me. The energy had changed. People didn't just tolerate the toll road now, they celebrated it. It wasn't just a dirt path anymore. It was a symbol, a line in the dust that someone had dared to draw. Finally, the ruling day arrived. I wore the same boots, same belt, same flannel I'd worn to every court visit. Clarissa stood tall beside me. Craig was back too, but this time he looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days. The courtroom filled fast. Local news cameras were rolling. The judge took her seat and cleared her throat. "This case," she began, "has revealed more than a dispute over land. It's revealed deep concerns about governance, respect, and boundaries, both literal and metaphorical." She paused, scanning the room. "Mr. Reeves has demonstrated lawful ownership of the road in question. He filed proper documents to operate a toll on his private land. There is no substantial evidence that the toll road has impeded emergency services. Furthermore, the original fence installed by the HOA was done without consent or negotiation, and violated property boundaries." She looked directly at the board members. "It is the court's ruling that Mr. Reeves has acted within his rights. The toll road may continue to operate. The HOA is ordered to remove any portion of the fence encroaching on Mr. Reeves' property and to issue a public statement of apology and correction. The room erupted. Not wild cheering, but satisfied murmurs, head nods, even a few tears from the older residents in the front row. I sat back in my seat, the tight knot in my chest finally loosening after months of holding it in. Craig didn't even look at me as he left the room. Outside, reporters swarmed, but I just gave one short statement. I didn't win today. The land did. And maybe a little bit of common sense. The fence came down the following week, not all at once, but panel by panel, removed quietly by workers who didn't meet my eyes. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching as the line they once drew so arrogantly vanished into piles of scrap. But I didn't take down the toll booth, it stayed. Not because I needed the money anymore, but because it reminded everyone what happens when you push people too far. Sometimes, a man doesn't just guard his gate. Sometimes, he turns it into a message. The morning after the last section of the fence came down, I stood at the edge of my porch and looked out over the land like I always had. Only this time, nothing stood in my way. The road, freshly graded and sun-warmed, stretched peacefully, from my barn all the way to the highway, unbroken, unclaimed by anyone but me. The toll booth stood quietly at its post, a simple wooden structure with a tin roof, small and weathered, but proud like a gatekeeper who had stood his ground and won the war. The ranch was quiet again, not silent. There was still the birds, the breeze rustling through the trees, and the distant call of cows ready for their morning feed, but peaceful in a way that hadn't existed for months. The noise, the stress, the lawsuits and arguments, all of it had finally passed. I didn't realize just how much tension I'd been carrying until it was gone. My shoulders felt lighter, my steps slower, more thoughtful. Still, the road wasn't the same. It wasn't just a dirt path anymore. Not to me, and not to anyone else. It had history now, not just family history, but public history. The kind people wrote about. There had been articles, online videos. One local news station had even run a week-long series on property rights and the Ranch Road Revolt. I was invited onto a podcast. I still don't really understand how those work. And some big-time real estate guy from Austin emailed me, offering to franchise the concept. I ignored him. I didn't want to turn the land into a brand. I just wanted it to be mine again. The toll booth stayed up, but the fee came down. I left a sign, toll optional pay if you support private land rights. And to my surprise, people still dropped money in the box. Not everyone, of course, but enough to keep it worth my while. Most left little notes folded between bills and coins. Notes like "you did the right thing," or "thanks for standing up for all of us," or simply "keep the gate open." One note, written on a child's crayon drawing, said, "My dad says you're the boss of the road." Maybe I was. The HOA, bruised and embarrassed, went quiet for a while. Craig was replaced during their next election. Someone told me he moved out altogether. Tired of the whispers and sideways glances, the new board president, a woman named Marla, came out to the ranch one afternoon, not to argue but to talk. She wore jeans and brought sweet tea in a thermos. "I think we all forgot something important," she said, handing me a cup. "We got so used to drawing lines and passing rules that we stopped remembering who we're supposed to serve. Homeowners, neighbors, people." I nodded. "Better late than never." "We'd like to do better," she said. "We're setting up a new committee to review property disputes before things escalate. We want someone neutral involved. You'd be good at that." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to work with the HOA, not with us, just near us, as a voice, someone who's not afraid to say no?" I didn't say yes right away. I wasn't sure I even wanted to be involved with them in any capacity, but over the next few weeks, I thought about it more. I wasn't looking for power. God knows I'd had my fill of it during the whole fence fiasco, but maybe, just maybe, I could help someone else avoid what I went through, keep things from getting ugly again, keep neighbors talking, instead of filing lawsuits and throwing up metal fences. So I agreed to attend a meeting, just one. That meeting turned into a few more. I didn't become anyone's best friend, but I earned their respect. Not everyone liked me. Some still thought I'd made a spectacle out of a molehill. But most listened when I spoke, and that was enough. Back on the ranch, things slowly returned to normal. I got back to fixing fences, the ones I actually owned. I replanted the section of the field that had been trampled during construction. I spent more time with my horses, took up woodworking again, and even started teaching Jace, the kid who helped me run the booth, how to ride and manage cattle. He was a quick learner, full of fire, and it felt good to pass something on. Nancy, the retired widow who'd worked the toll booth during the chaos, decided to stick around to not for the booth. She said she was done with politics. Thank you very much, but because the ranch had become her second home. She started planting a garden near the barn, and I gave her a little plot of land to do as she pleased. Visitors still came sometimes, folks who had read about the road or seen the news. Reports I didn't mind. I'd walk them down the path, show them the old fence post still lying in a pile near the tree line, and tell them the story if they asked. They always expected something more dramatic than the truth. They expected fights, shouting, betrayals. But the real story, I told them, was much simpler. A man had a road. Someone tried to take it, so he said no. One evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in long streaks of orange and lavender. I walked down the road alone. The booth stood quietly in its place, untouched. The mailbox for tolls had a few new bills in it, folded carefully, like offerings. I opened the flap and found another note inside, written in neat cursive on lined notebook paper. Thank you for keeping the road. Some of us needed to see it was okay to fight back, even if it's just $5 at a time. I folded the note and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Then I looked down the road, dusty and golden in the last light, stretching into the horizon, where the ranch met the world. I thought about everything that had happened, the fights, the courtroom, the late nights wondering if I'd made a mistake, but I didn't feel anger, not anymore, not even toward the HOA. What I felt was something deeper, something steadier. I felt ownership, not just of the land, but of the choice I made to stand up, to dig in my heels and say, no more. They built a fence thinking they could box me in, but all they did was show me where to draw the line. And I did, not with barbed wire or concrete dot, but with principle, with grit, and with one small toll booth. That reminded everyone who passed through this land had a story, and the man who owned it knew how to tell it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more real-life twists and tales. Catch more gripping content only on Bright Reality, where truth meets storytelling.